5 to 10 seconds to get back on.
Okay.
So if anything's kind of going on, I'll put it in the speaker chat, but
sure.
So far it's been pretty good. All right, we are at time. Oh, let me. All right. Hello, everybody. My name is Portia O'Neill, and we are here for Neil Lynch's 3 pre-sales lessons that changed my career. And I am so excited to be your moderator today. If you're not familiar with DemoFest, it's presented by Consensus. We are leading the world into a new era of demo automation. Our platforms gets your buyers what they need when they need it, and it multiplies your revenues and team's impact. As a result, you're going to get faster close times, larger deals, and higher close rates. You can learn more about Consensus at goconsensus.com. We've got a micro demo on our website or in the Docs tab right next to your chat. We encourage you to participate today. You're going to be participating a couple different ways. We've got the chat. If you want to speak directly to the team here, you'll go into the session chat. And we also will have a Q&A section as well. So when you have questions, put them in the Q&A and we will pull them from there at the end. So if at any time you're having technical difficulties, there is a gear icon in the bottom of your screen. If you go ahead and hit that, it will open up some troubleshooting. And they have a light version of this if you are getting some buffering. So we do recommend jump into that if you are having any issues. All right. Well, our speaker, Neil Lynch, is a pre-sales leader and solutions evangelist with diverse experience as a developer, a sales engineer, and a partnership manager, and most recently, a marketer. He has over 20 years of experience in sales engineering, and he's credited with influencing over $30 million in revenue. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to you, Neil. We will see you for Q&A.
All right. Thank you, Portia. Appreciate it. So, hey, it's fantastic to be here for a couple of reasons. The big one is that I started sales engineering. I took this job that I didn't even know what it was back in 2001. I was a programmer. I was doing web development. I was doing e-commerce development. And I had the opportunity to do this weird role that I'd never heard of before called a sales engineer. And for me, it was fantastic because I was not your typical technology computer person at the time. The stereotype, especially back then, was that the techies were not very socially adept and they kept to themselves, and they, you just slid a box of pizza under the door and they would program whatever you wanted, right? That was not me. And so this idea that I could be technical and still talk to people all the time was fantastic for me. And of course that led to a tremendous career. And I've had the privilege of being in sales engineering and helping customers be successful for over, I think it's about 23 years. My journey recently has moved me over into product marketing. Certainly I'll always have sales engineering in my heart. And frankly, a lot of the skills that I learned as a sales engineer have helped me kind of jumpstart my career, my new journey into product marketing. So I'm just curious, for those of you who are attending, I would love to know how long you've been in sales engineering. So if you could go into the session chat and just say, hey, and let us know, or let me know how long you've been a sales engineer. I'd be curious to know what the average tenure is roughly of this group here. So I'll just spend a second here and watch. I see somebody there, it's 25 years. Yeah, that's actually more than me. So congratulations on that. And also too, if you're not a sales engineer right now, like if you used to be and you're not, what are you doing these days? I realize that we have quite a few attendees at this conference who aren't necessarily currently in sales engineering as I am. So I see we've got literally all over the board. We've got months. We have 3 months. Congratulations. We've got, it seems like the average is roughly 10 to 15 years. And of course, yeah, as the kids say, John, that's a flex, right? I started off as a COBOL programmer. All right. I actually know. In fact, I even know that it stands for Common Business Language, but that's a different story. So, all right, without further ado, I would like to get into my presentation about the 3 pre-sales lessons that I've learned over there that really changed my career. And these all happened at various points in my journey where after I embraced the lesson, it definitely improved my ability to be an effective pre-sales or sales engineer, solutions consultant, what have you. I'll probably use the term sales engineer throughout the presentation. So if you hear that, just assume pre-sales or any similar related role. So what I'll do in this presentation is I'm going to talk about a real life example of something that happened. I'll talk about some applications of that example and kind of dive a little deeper into it, and then I will summarize it with the lesson that I learned. So that's what we're going to go through today through our presentation. So let's go ahead and get this started. So lesson number 1. So lesson 1 has to do really with the notion of how we conduct ourselves personally as a sales engineer. And this is one of the first lessons that I learned. I didn't quite grasp it at the time, but it definitely had a major impact on my career from that point forward. So we'll start off, and the real life example, I call this the dynamo evangelist. Now, a little backstory on this for those of you who are familiar with the e-commerce space. I worked for a company called Art Technology Group, which was more commonly known as ATG. I was there for over 9 years and felt like I was really, at the forefront, the early stages of enterprise e-commerce. And it was a fantastic career. But it was interesting because when I joined, they said the job was a sales engineer, but then when I got my title was Dynamo Evangelist, which, if you know, back then, ATG's application server product was named Dynamo, right? But one of the first sales engineers that I met and worked with when I arrived at Art Technology Group, or ATG, was a guy named James. James was one. If you saw him, you would think, he's just a typical developer guy. But James was the first person to really illustrate the power of presence, the power of being a strong personality. He was incredibly smart. He knew the product inside and out. But he was the first person that I really saw that was able to truly persuade people. He had a passion for the product. He was incredibly convincing. He would get excited in meetings. I would see him present to customers, and I'm thinking, this guy's got to calm down because it's like he's had too much caffeine today. But he was genuinely thrilled about what our solution did and how it helped customers. In fact, I recall that James actually sold our software to a company based on one feature that the company ended up never using when they owned the software. But because he was so powerful and so convincing, and because they really liked him, that was part of what persuaded them to buy the solution. So I always think of James as an example of somebody that went beyond just the X's and O's, so to speak, to use a sports analogy. He knew how the product worked, he knew all the regular stuff, but he went above and beyond that as far as being personable and relatable and really having a passion and just being likable. Another example that I then took from that and then applied a couple years later, we'll call this the on-site evaluation bake-off. So I'll set the stage for you. I was asked to help participate in a bake-off between 2 vendors. So this was a large office supply company in the Midwest who decided they wanted to re-platform their e-commerce solution. So they had they had an eval process, and they narrowed it down to 2 finalists. And so they wanted to have a bake-off between the 2 finalists. So they actually had 2 teams within their company separate, and each one worked with one of the other with one of the 2 vendors. So it was my company, and it was another company that you probably recognize. They're really big, and they have a 3-letter acronym, or 3-letter name. And there was a time when nobody got fired for buying them, right? So it was my company and this competitor. We were paired up with small teams within the company, and our job was to build basically a proof of concept in our respective solution to then present to the board or the decision makers to be able for them to make a decision. So I remember going in there and meeting the team that I was assigned to, and I took this principle about the interpersonal skills, the likability. I took that to heart, and I really focused on not just helping them build out the proof of concept, but also teaching them how the solution worked, and getting to know them personally, and doing things like when we had opportunities, hey, we all went to lunch together, or I tried to get them included with, I had them meet a lot of our other people, our product managers, and our organization in general embraced this approach anyway. So even when I brought other people from our company into this opportunity to help with the proof of concept, we were all personable, friendly. We were engaging. We were very excited. We were very passionate about our solution. So that made it, pretty easy. And over the course of the eval, which was a couple of weeks, we started getting feedback from the other team. And it was pretty clear that, first of all, the other solution wasn't able to accomplish all the stuff they wanted it to do. And the other thing we got to find out was that, you know what? The other people, they weren't even that interesting. They weren't that fun. They weren't engaging. They were just, hey, they were smart. They knew what they were doing. They were there to do a job, and they left. They didn't really add that personal element to it. So, in fact, I remember one time they sent me down to the lobby to let in a member of the competitor's team into the office one day. So it was just it was weird. Ultimately, the proof of concept went in our favor, and ultimately we ended up closing the deal. And I would say, besides the fact that our technology was, in my opinion, vastly superior, it was the fact that we were personable. We tried to engage. We tried to connect. We tried to move beyond just being competent and just knowing our stuff in that regard. And I got to think about this a little bit. And the principle that I'm going to talk about here is something that I've seen in other places, but in particular, a guy named Bill Hillsman, who was a political consultant. Now, don't worry, we're not getting political here, okay? He was a political consultant who used to help independent candidates who weren't part of, in the U.S., the 2-party system. His job was to help independent underdog candidates be successful. And he identified 3 things that make an effective candidate. And I would say that they also make an effective sales engineer. The first one is legitimacy. Now, legitimacy isn't necessarily something that you can do yourself. It's more about your company, about who you are. It's just about whether are you the real deal? You're not about to be delisted by the NASDAQ, and you're not strapped for cash, that kind of stuff. So those are things that are most out of your control. But then the second thing, besides legitimacy, that makes someone effective is being credible. Do you know what you're talking about? Do you have experience in the space that I'm working in? Okay. And this is usually where most people stop. Am I legitimate? Am I credible? Okay, I can move forward. But there's a third one that I think is important. And what I want to talk about is it's, even in this day and age, as we continue to remove humans more and more out of the process, human interaction is still incredibly important. Not to get into a psychology or an anthropology lesson, but humans are wired for connection. We are wired to be social with other people. And I think that when it comes down to when you're presenting, there's an acronym, and I kind of used a technical way to represent it, but the messenger is more important, or depending on your interpretation, as important as the message itself. Okay. Um, you can know everything and you can have all the knowledge and even have the answer to a customer's problems. But if it's difficult to get that message because the messenger is struggling or the messenger isn't effective, then sometimes those opportunities get missed, right? Like think about, for those of you who know the poem, The Tree, uh, the poem says, I think that I shall never see a poem lovely as a tree. You know, if I read the poem to you, you'd be like, oh yeah, it's a great poem. But if you had some, classically trained popular actor read it, they would sound like this. They'd be, I think that I shall never see a poem lovely as a tree, right? Like it's a lot easier to receive that and to hear that when it's presented the right way. So what I say is that the messenger is more important than the message. And so if you can effectively engage the people you're working with, whether it's in a presentation, whether it's part of a sales cycle, whatever the case is, your ability to convey that information in a manner that's received by them, that's incredibly powerful. So to get back to our example, that third thing that makes you effective, that sets you apart from a lot of other sales engineers, is just be likable. Now, that doesn't mean that you have to crack jokes, and humor is a double-edged sword. I know from, unfortunately, personal experience in those regards. It doesn't mean that you have to be sappy or insincere. It just means that you're likable. You love the product you're working with. You like talking to people. You get to know them. Just being an approachable person who wants to help. Right? Likability can take different forms with different people, but ultimately, being likable is the lesson that I learned. So, lesson number one is be likable, because people, even in this day and age, people still buy from people. All right. And like I said before, even as we begin to um, outsource more of our brains to generative AI, and being a little silly there, uh, people interaction is still incredibly important. In fact, I would argue it's even more important these days than it has been in the past. All right. So we've talked about pre-sales lesson number one, be likable, because people still buy from people. So let's talk about lesson two. Now, lesson two is an interesting one. It's something that I came across, and I think I quantified myself a couple of years into my pre-sales sales engineering career. And this is something that all of you have probably had happen to you at one point or another. All right. It's the situation where you identify an opportunity, you and the salesperson enter a meeting with them. You have an agenda. We want to do discovery. We want to find out what their pain points are. Let's find potentially some advantages for our solution. Let's see how we can, let's figure out what's going on with them right now so we can help them. And it happens more often than we care to admit. You get to that point, you get to the meeting, and the customer just says, you know what? I want to see a demo right now. I don't care. I want to see a demo. Now, there's a couple. Now, of course, as we know, the book says, don't do that, right? You have discovery first. There's no, don't do the show up and throw up or the harbor cruise or the standard demo or whatever you want to call it, right? But sometimes there's ways to leverage that, right? So what we, in this one company I worked at, what we started to do often when we started getting that was we said, okay, you know what, we'll go ahead and fire up the demo and we'll show the solution. But what we were doing with it, we were using that as an opportunity to begin the discovery process. So we would start showing stuff and then start asking questions. And basically, we would then get exactly what we needed to anyway. And the prospect, well, they felt like they saw a demo. They felt like that we answered their question or met their needs or their requirements. But so both parties still got what they wanted out of the interaction. All right. We used to call it the disco demo. So, if you remember disco in the 70s, whatever, I know that one guy from the COBOL programmer probably remembers the disco. So, but that's something that happens a lot is is you plan your meetings out, and we all should, right? You should all have a game plan. You should have the agenda from a sales cycle perspective, from an individual meeting perspective. You should have it planned out, what you're trying to accomplish, who's going to be there, what the objective is, what the next steps are going to be afterwards, all of that, right? But as we know, plans sometimes get changed. And here are some other real life examples. And these are all things that I have personally experienced in sales cycles over the years. All right. And I'm not going to go through every single one, but you'll probably recognize many of these. And I'm guessing that most of you have dealt with at least one of these situations. The first one, of course, is the customer hijacks the agenda. Doesn't matter what you plan in advance. They want to do something different. They want to rearrange the agenda, or they want to talk about something else entirely they didn't have planned. Another example is you plan an agenda and we have an hour for the sales engineer to present their customized demo that addresses the customer's requirements. And something happens, someone's late, other parts run over their allotted time, and they get to you and they say, all right, you got 20 minutes. I had an hour, but I got 20 minutes now. Yikes. What do you do with that? This doesn't happen as often as it used to, but there was a time when it was a big deal where you always had to verify the internet connection. I mean, and to this day, it could still happen. I mean, you've got a company where there's construction across the street and someone digs up the fiber optic cable and wipes out the internet. I mean, those are things that happen, right? Another one, which has happened to me one time, is laptop failure. Obviously, with most things being browser based, this is a little easier to overcome, but it's still really, really inconvenient when your laptop decides to die. Literally, I tested the demo. I knew everything worked. I walked into the meeting, opened the laptop, blue screen of death. It was fantastic. Also, too, something else that happens quite a bit is when you have a large group evaluating a solution and you have meetings, and your salesperson is very careful to ensure that the right people are in the room, and they know who's going to be there, they know the audience, they know what the objectives are, and then these unknown attendees show up. We don't know who they are. Sometimes they're at the consultancy. Sometimes they were just passing in the hall, and the champion was like, "Hey, come in here." What's even better is when they start asking questions, because you have no idea what their intent is, what their motivation is, where they're coming from. And this is something that I had actually happen as recently as 2 years ago, and it's happened other times as well. We're always spending time trying to figure out who the champions are, and we're always trying to figure out, who is going to be in our favor, and we always try to find who's against us, who used to work for a previous solution, who used to evaluate the other solution in the past. How can we neutralize them or negate their negative impacts? Sometimes those antagonistic attendees show up in your meetings, and sometimes they speak up, and sometimes it's not pretty. So that's a very interesting opportunity. The other one too that happens a lot with customers is either because they are not going to buy you, or because they're already convinced they're going to buy you, they're pretty relaxed and they start going on all kinds of rabbit trails. They start talking about things that have nothing to do with the presentation or what you're talking about, and they get you completely off track, and it becomes very difficult to kind of bring them back around. And this one, as much as it shouldn't happen these days, with all of the education that we have around sales engineering and how SEs and AEs work together, this still happens once in a while. Especially if you get a newer sales rep, you're doing your demo, your presentation of the solution, you have it all set up, and you know that there are certain parts of the solution that don't work, or don't work as well as they could, so we're not going to touch them. But sure enough, that new sales rep says, "Hey, why don't you go click on that thing?" It's like, thanks, man. Still happens. So I think that all of this is leading to this notion that I think we just, and this was the first part of this lesson, was learning that things are going to happen no matter how much you plan, no matter how much you set. And by the way, you absolutely should. Planning is critical. Having those knowledge transfers before you meet with the customer, having a game plan going into meetings, doing dry runs of your presentations beforehand. All of that is still critical. But you know what? We have to accept the fact that sometimes things change, right? There's several different sayings that are related to this, but my favorite one is thinking about what Mike Tyson once famously said: is that everyone has a plan until they get punched in the mouth, right? Now I'm hoping that none of you ever got punched in the mouth in a sales cycle. That would be weird. But metaphorically, we've all been punched in the mouth when we have a plan, we go in, and something absolutely changes. So, what I would say is that, in my experience, personal and also watching others, as you mature and become, as you get more time or as you work as a sales engineer longer, you begin to develop this ability to improvise, the ability to take something that's happening and turn it the way you want. So again, improvisation is a skill set that I noticed was something that the best sales engineers always had. They always had the ability to go with the flow, roll with the punches, take a situation and turn it into, the company's favor. Okay. Now, when I say improvisation, invariably, most of you, at least in the US, most of you think comedy, improv comedy. And you probably think of the TV show Whose Line Is It Anyway? Or you've probably seen improv comedy troupes perform. And it's fantastic, right? You see that they're on stage, they get a suggestion from the audience, or they're working with each other, and they're basically building off each other to continue the scene forever as long as they need to. And it's a thing of beauty when it works great. Another way to talk about improvisation, which I alluded to earlier, is this notion of jujitsu. If you don't know, jujitsu is a martial art that's not based on kicking and punching as much as it is based on throwing and leverage, right? It's about taking the opponent's mass and weight and momentum and redirecting it for your benefit and against them, right? And I think that that's really a lot of what we see in sales calls or sales cycles where things change, right? It's this idea of, how do I take what's happening and how do I redirect it into a positive way that's going to result in the right outcome that we want, whether it's closing the deal or helping a customer get educated, whatever that may be. And something interesting about the principle of improv comedy or improvisation, if you ever notice them, you ever notice that they never say no? When you're watching one of those skits and they're building off of each other and taking suggestions and going back and forth, one of the foundational principles of improv is being open to the suggestion. I call it the yes and, right? You notice they never say no. Like, if you ever seen a skit where somebody, or the two comedians are working together and they're building off each other, and one says something outrageous and there just goes, no, I'm not going to do that, right? That would, the scene would just come to a screeching halt, right? And that same thing can happen sometimes in a sales opportunity, especially in a meeting, right? So to me, I found that the best sales engineers are the ones who can take that moment, take that opportunity, and turn it into an advantage. Kind of like when the customer wants to see a demo, but you want to do discovery. And so how can we leverage that? So I think that's really important. That ability to improvise is so important that, in fact, I actually did some. You've heard of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? Food, shelter, clothing, all that kind of stuff. It's a pyramid. I have created Neil's hierarchy of pre-sales needs. All right. So it all starts with solution mastery. You absolutely have to know your product cold, and the solutions that you're responsible for, you have to know them inside and out. You don't necessarily have to be able to develop them all the time, although that helps. But you got to know everything about that solution and everything related to it. That, to me, is the foundation. Everything else you do that's successful as a pre-sales person builds off of that. All right. The second thing on top of that, of course, in Neil's hierarchy of pre-sales needs, is communication. So this is all the stuff about being able to, your presentation skills, how you conduct yourself, not having your hands in your pocket playing with your keys or your change, right? Or not having anything in your pockets at all, or where to stand in a presentation, how to make eye contact, how to interact with people in situations. that's all part of communication, and that's the next step on top of knowing the solution, knowing how to communicate. I would say the next level on that is consulting skills. So this is taking the basic communication skills a step further and being able to help customers in the solutioning process, helping guide and direct their thoughts, not just helping them understand how your solution will work with them, but helping them solve their problem in ways. And sometimes it doesn't necessarily involve your solution, but it's connected to it. Anyway, very important. So once you have these three levels established, then to me, that the top of the pyramid that makes you a complete sales engineer is the ability to improvise, the ability to take moments and opportunities and successfully redirect them in a way that helps you accomplish what you want, but also satisfies and even in some cases delights the customer. All right. So that is lesson number 2 that I learned, which is embrace improvisation. Because really, once you expect the unexpected and are able to improvise and you're able to adapt to the situation, then nothing unexpected ever happens. And really, that's true in my career. I can say that the longer I was a sales engineer, the less and less I was surprised. But at the same time, the more and more I was prepared because of my experience. And so improvisation is a great skill. In fact, listen, I would even say this. You should think about attending an improv comedy class. Every city has them. They're usually, I mean, they're not that expensive. They take a couple weeks, but I think it's a valuable skill to learn improv to help you be able to improvise and to adapt in sales meetings. So that's an idea for all you pre-sales leaders. Make your next team event, have it do an improv class. And actually, it's funny, a lot of those improv comedy schools actually do business meetings like that. You can set that up. All right. So we've talked about being likable. We've talked about embracing improvisation. Now this last one is really about how you perceive yourself in your customer's eyes, right? I have 3 lessons that I'll go through relatively quickly to talk about this. Or 3 examples, excuse me. The first example is something that was very simple but very profound. I was in a presentation. I had another sales engineer with me. We were working together on this opportunity, and he had been a sales engineer longer than I had. Very good speaker. His name is Jim, not James from the earlier example. This is just Jim. But Jim and I presented together, and after the presentation, when we debriefed, I was a little disappointed in my performance. I didn't think I spoke well. I thought I stumbled over my words. I wasn't sure if I conveyed everything the way I should. And Jim he kind of looked at me and he said, "What did the customer think?" So, well, they seemed positive. They were engaged. They asked a lot of questions. I thought it went well. And that was his point. His point was, what did the customer think of that meeting? If the customer thought it was good, then, certainly you need to continue to improve and refine your craft and how you present, but don't beat yourself up over it too much because the customer was happy. So that was the first example that led me to this lesson. The second one has to do with the product itself. This was years after the first incident. I was working for a company, and I was reselling an e-commerce platform that was cobbled together from a bunch of other solutions. And so each separate function, the catalog management, the marketing, the admin of the site, they were all in separate interfaces and all required separate logins. And that used to really annoy me. I did not like presenting that. I thought it was a challenge. I wish it were better. And so going into this meeting, presenting our solution, I was almost apologetic about the interfaces. But as I presented everything, the customer said, "We really like the fact that there's separate logins for each interface." I'm like, "Why?" They said, "Because one of their problems was role separation. they had different people doing different jobs, and they didn't want them to be able to see what the other was doing or impact it. So for them, at their point in time in their situation, having all of those separate roles, they loved it. They thought it was fantastic. You know, I thought it was a bug, and they thought it was a feature. So that was the second example. The third example, the last one about this, was something that only happened to me one time, but it was one of the most bizarre things I ever saw in my life or experienced in my life as a sales engineer. We were talking to a financial services company down in Texas. We were selling our solution. The way that the evaluation went was they had an RFP that they had us fill out. And by the way, I could talk forever about how much I love RFPs, but whatever, it's a different story. I don't love them. I'm kidding. So we had this RFP, we filled it out. And then as part of the evaluation process, we went on site, met with the customer or the prospect, and we went through the RFP point by point and actually illustrated in the solution. We did like little micro demos in the solution of how it would meet the particular requirement expressed in the RFP. So we went through this, and the meeting was going well. And there were several questions that I answered in the negative, saying that we didn't do this particular thing they wanted to see. You know, as we know, sales engineers, we are very, very protective of our integrity, right? We want to make sure that even though we might be getting pressure from elsewhere or whatever the case is, or it's very easy sometimes just to be flippant and almost be deceptive, we want to be very careful when we answer an RFP question. You know, this is what it does, or this is what it could do, right? We try to be very careful to be as precise as possible, and also to given the limited information you have at times. So I had answered a couple of these questions in the negative. So we get to that point in the RFP, and I show something about what we do, and it wasn't exactly what they wanted because they had already said that I already said in the RFP we didn't do it. The customer stopped us and he said, wait a second. You said you didn't do this, but I just saw it on the screen. You showed me exactly what we wanted to see. And of course, there's that moment where, you know how sales engineers like to over explain things and try to, you know, people please and word vomit a lot of times. That was a moment where I actually was like, okay, well, I guess I misunderstood the requirement and it does what it does. So the customer was happy. And of course, we were happy. And that actually happened 3 more times in that RFP evaluation, where I had understated our ability because I wanted to be precise and clear and accurate. But when they saw it in action, it was exactly what they wanted. Now, the good news is, the end of the story is we ended up closing that opportunity. So it was good. And all 3 of those examples together lead me to this idea that I think we forget sometimes because we are so close to the situation. We're doing our presentations. We're trying to implement all the things that we've read in all of our books and everything our boss is telling us. And we get so focused on tactically trying to get everything precise in a meeting, which is a worthy effort, by the way. But I think sometimes, you know, there's a saying that it's an English idiom that, you know, I think everybody's heard at some point, is that you can't see the forest for the trees, right? Sometimes you get so bogged down in the details that you forget that there's a forest here, right? You get so concerned about how you're presenting and how you made a mistake that you forget the fact that overall the customer liked your presentation. Or I put another way, is that you work with your product and your solution day in, day out. You know everything about it. You know the warts, you know the shortcomings, you know the stuff that you wish product management would just fix and they haven't done it yet. And it gets frustrating. And sometimes you almost feel like it's apologetic. And especially if you're comparing it to a competitor solution, you're painfully aware of where the 2 solutions, you know, rate on certain features and functions. And so it's very easy to forget that just because you think it's a problem doesn't mean the customer necessarily thinks it's a problem. That's actually happened more than once in my career. And so I think that the big lesson I learned from that is that even though we're trying to strive to be better, even though we know our product is a work in progress and it's always going to be evolving and changing, and there's going to be points where things aren't quite where you want it to be, always remember that you need to accept the customer's perception, because their perception is your reality. I mean, obviously you may want things to be better, but don't be too hard on yourself, right? If you have done the work and you've presented things, and if the customer likes what you've done, then that's enough, right? Obviously, you're still going to try to work and improve and be better on all the other little things that you do, because the saying about trifles make perfection, and perfection is no trifle, right? But ultimately, it's about the customer, honestly. So that's lesson 3, and that's the 3 pre-sales lessons that I learned over time that actually changed my career and improved my ability to be a good sales engineer. Being likable, because you know what, people still buy from people. Embracing improvisation, because the unexpected always happens, but if you're expecting it, it won't happen. That was super eloquent on my part, wasn't it? And then the last one is accept the customer's perception. Just remember, it's about them, all right? If they like it, that's good, right? I mean, the opposite can be true too. But in general, don't worry about don't get so focused on the trees that you forget about the forest. All right. So that concludes what I had prepared. I would love to, if you have any questions, we've got a few minutes here before before the final keynote session. So, go into the Q&A box, and if you have any particular questions, I'm going to ask Portia to queue those up for me. But yeah, if you have any questions, go ahead and ask away. I'd be happy to answer anything you may have during this next few minutes.
Awesome. Thank you, Neil. That was great. I really enjoyed that. So we've got a couple questions here. I'm going to start from beginning to end, since it seems like they were pretty on spot with what you were talking about. So when you were doing the discovery demo, what was the AE's role in the conversation? Can you talk us through how that worked?
So I think that it depends on, there's a lot of factors. In this particular instance, the way it worked was that usually the SC would drive the discovery. That's not always the case, and I think in some there's the proper way to do it, right? Obviously, the AE should be gathering as much information as possible. They should be trying to inform as much of what they've learned into the conversation, and it depends on the company and their process. But in that particular case, I was the one driving the discovery. The AE didn't really have a lot of information other than, hey, they're a prospect. We mentioned our solution. They were interested. And so, yeah, in that case, I drove it. That's not always, depends on your process and the opportunity. Obviously, the best AEs I've worked with honestly made my life really easy, because they usually brought most of the discovery ahead of time. And so our meeting was just really to confirm what we had learned up to that point.
Awesome. I bet you have some good stories. So customers, you were talking about customers going down rabbit trails. How do you address this on a call? Our system has the potential to integrate with other systems. So of course, everyone wants to talk about integrations right out of the gate. How do you reel them back in to the first task at hand, and why they came to us in the first place, and the value for the core software?
So this isn't a hard and fast rule, but what I have found in cases like that, where you have a solution and it addresses their core problem, it is, but they just want to know about something else. The way that I like to approach that when possible is throw them a bone. Basically, give them a very short, succinct answer to what they want to know, right? So it's almost as simple as saying, "Oh, I want to have integrations." Spend a brief moment of time affirming, "Yeah, we integrate. We have all these things, and here's why it's important," right? So then taking that and then leveraging it, kind of dovetailing that into the conversation about the value of the solution, right? So you give them something they want. So you answer their question, but you use it as a springboard to talk about the real value of what they're doing. I think that's in my mind, when that happens, that's generally my approach, because I know that the reason they're asking the question because it's really top of mind. They've been burned in the past, something's going wrong, and they want to believe you, they want to do it, but they just have this one little thing that has to be covered, and they want to know about it right now. So basically, is I give them a little taste of it, and then we talk about the overall solution, and then afterwards we come back, and then we can get into all the integration talk they want.
Awesome. Thank you. All right. Next one. What are some ways to fight back on customers hijacking the agenda respectfully?
Yeah, respectfully. Yeah, sorry, that was just I watch too much TikTok apparently. So I I think that, and now this is a lot of this. Really, honestly, this has to do with um, it's got to be teamwork with you and your AE, the salesperson on the opportunity. Um, so I think that generally I mean, it depends on the style of who the SE is too, but the strategy is typically um, explaining to them, yeah, we can do that. Again, it's the whole yes and, right? So it's, yeah, we can do that. Um, Let me just show you like what this does, right? Like you're saying, I mean, like an example is, well, we want to move. Sometimes it's really easy. We want to move this part of the agenda to the front of the meeting, and you say, well, we'd love to do that. The person that we have for that part of it is not going to be here until later in the day. So what else would you like to do? Another example would be just kind of taking the opportunity to remind them, you know, what else will get affected, right? So, if we talk about this, there's ways to present that. Again, it's got to be between, the AE and the SC working together. I think that's what's critical. I don't have a hard and fast answer for this, but from an advice perspective, I say that it's generally um, helping, like agreeing to do it, but explaining to them what's going to happen if you do it that way. Now, in some cases, it doesn't matter. You can move the agenda around; nobody cares, right? Um, but I think it's that persistence in trying to draw it back. You understand the primary objective, what you're trying to do, just trying to draw it back, and again, using the jujitsu analogy, taking what they give you, kind of answering them and trying to move it back. It's subtle and it's not always effective. Sometimes it doesn't matter what you do, the customer's just going to do what they want, and then you have to be able to deal with that as well.
Yeah, I feel that. Thinking on your feet is definitely a necessary skill. All right, last and final question from Claudia. How has your preparation for pre-sales engagements evolved with the advent of AI technologies? What new strategies or tools are you integrating in your processes?
So this question makes me sad because I haven't been a frontline solutions consultant since June of last year. So that's when I switched roles. However, I do have thoughts on how AI is going to help with that. I guess for me, I'm still I can kind of see where AI is going to head in the future. I kind of think like I imagine that um, again, this is one of those philosophical discussions, but I think that generative AI is presented the opportunity to actually, in some cases, be able to build an entire custom demo without having input. Imagine going to a prompt and saying, I would like to see a demo of XYZ solution for a customer who is in this space, who has this size of company. And here's a couple of attached files with sample data from their catalog, right? Imagine being able to do that and have it just spit out an entire demo, right? I think that for the short term now, from a preparation perspective, it really depends. And I think that AI is about streamlining or automating mundane processes right now. That's what it's mostly being used for. Um, I I think that sometimes my only suggestion I think is that you could use AI as a means of, or Gen AI, excuse me. Now I sound like all the marketers talking about AI, right? Ugh. Don't tell them I said that. Generative AI is great for helping, like if you um, it helps you summarize things. Like, so for example, if they give you If they have a bunch of points, you can use it to help create your talking points in some cases. I would never blindly take their output and just throw it out there, but I think it's a way to help with summarizing details. I mean, that's a vague answer, mainly because my focus lately has been how is AI going to disrupt marketing? I can tell you it's going to do it a lot. I just don't know what it is exactly yet. But I would say that um, I haven't heard of my colleagues where I work now. I haven't heard of them using AI much other than for summarizing large documents or requirements you get from the user and being able to help sift through things. I mean, sometimes that might be easier than going through it all yourself, right? But I can also see where this is going to really revolutionize things like filling out RFPs. Can you imagine? I don't have to do an RFP anymore. That would be beautiful. I'd like to eliminate RFPs altogether, but I know that's probably, that's pie in the sky thinking here. But yeah, so sorry, that's not the answer you're looking for, but that's kind of where I'm at in my journey. So that's how I've seen it. I'd be curious about how other people have used AI in prepping for demos, if they have at all. So
yeah, I think for me, kind of at the post-sale motion, every time I have somebody who wants to talk about a new use case, right, I have to tee up some level of conversation, crafting a deck, answering their specifics. And so I take a full deck, dump it into a tool, and I ask for give me a specific outline to talk to somebody who wants to use this for marketing, who wants to put a demo on their website. And it'll at least give me a jumping off point to craft my story, especially if it's new features, right? Or those little pieces, and really just what metrics matter to that certain person, and really, so that I understand their role better.
right.
That definitely is a way. And we did get an additional question. So we'll put this one up. Any suggestions on addressing possible internal friction? Hot take, AE, SE lead, when you're trying to improvise.
When I first crafted this, it was a lesson I learned, but it was actually about the AE SE relationship. That is an interesting one. It is, I hate to say it depends, but you also have to apply that improvisation with your AE as well, because sometimes you're going to see things. And I mean, here's an example of what I'm thinking of is, let's say that you are in a presentation, you have it planned out, there's a part of it that's not working and you don't want to go there. And the salesperson or the AE inevitably says, go there, right? Depending on the relationship you have with the AE, which this is why the relationship's important, because sometimes you can give them like the side eye or give them the sign, like the delayed double steal, right? Like, no, that's not going to work. Don't do that. Or you can, if you have to go for it, I can say sometimes you can caveat it and say, here's a disclaimer, I haven't worked on this. This thing might, we were focused on this part. Like, being honest is okay, right? Because everybody's seen a demo. I don't like this idea of pretending like everything's perfect when it's not. I think that's stupid and that you lose credibility doing that. But if you're forced to do it, just caveat and say, hey, this might not work, right? I mean, there have been times, by the way, where I'm in a situation where I don't have a good rapport with the AE. We haven't worked ahead of time. They do something like that and they insist on going down that path. And so it's like, all right, time to stump the band. Let's see what happens. Now, obviously, there's all kinds of problems with that, because if it doesn't work and things go south, there's a lot of issues there as well. But I think that's why it's really important to have a good AE-SE relationship to avoid that stuff. And I think having that conversation in advance is really important. Just say, don't go off the script, or before the demo, say, look, I know there's stuff not working here, so don't suggest going anywhere else. And then sometimes that works out, because then the AE will actually change how they ask the question in the meeting in such a way that the SE is like, oh, I can say no to this. It's okay, right? So it really depends, but that's why it's so important to have a good relationship. And it's also really important. There's always going to be a moment where no matter what you've tried, you have to do it anyway. As long as you have your bases covered, that's what you can do.
Fabulous. All right. Well, thank you so much for being here. It was a great session. If you have never attended any of our in-person events, you are missing out. We recently had our San Francisco Demo Fest in February, and we are coming to London and New York City later this year. So if you head to demofest.com, you'll be able to sign up on our interest list. It does not RSVP you. Once the session opens, we open for limited space. So make sure that you register. Our London one fills up really quickly. Don't forget to visit our virtual expo hall. We've got our premier partners who are hanging out in there. Consensus is a free event for you, and it's also completely crowdsourced. So there's no transfer of money when it comes to getting speakers. So they put in a lot of work in, making this event a success. So please visit them, show them some love. Our last keynote for the day is going to be Jim Hogan from Google Cloud, and you will automatically be pushed to his session at the top of the hour. So take a break. You got 5 minutes, and we'll see you back here shortly. Neil, thank you again so much for all of your valuable insights. I loved hearing your stories. I feel like I need to grab a beer with you sometime very soon.
All right. Oracle's buying.
Yeah. All right. We'll see you next time.